Hey everyone, Tristan here. Today we're going to go over a little bit of basic chess strategy and then we're going to talk about the Queen's Gambit a little bit. Um, so first, let's go over some basic strategy. Here's your chessboard, and the first thing you want to focus on um, is, hold on a second, the first thing you're going to want to focus on is developing your pieces, and what that means is, just getting them out onto the board. Um, you want to get your minor pieces out first. You want to get, you know, uh, knights and bishops and pawns out there, and that's really with the goal of controlling the center, and the center being, these four spaces right here and the adjacent spaces. Because, here, let's just, make a little bit of a sample. Um, you can see most of the fights, in chess with pieces taking and stuff are going to happen, on real estate in the center here. And so if we go back and let's say, if white is really good at controlling the center and black isn't, let's say, um, then white is going to have a huge advantage later on. This is just some random configuration of pieces. No one would actually play this badly. But now, now white has much more control over the center, and thus, if black wants to try and develop its pieces or get anything out there, basically, let's make white move. Basically, there's almost like nowhere that white can't, take a piece if black tries to move immediately. If he wants to move his bishop here, taken, wants to move his knight here, taken by the pawn, wants to move his knight here. I mean, I guess that's okay, but like you can see what I mean. There's so many more possibilities for white in this game than black, and so if we played this out from this configuration, with evenly skilled players, white would almost always win in this case. So let's go back a little bit. So now, yeah, you want to develop your pieces and you want to gain control of the center of the board. Those kind of go together because, the pieces they're not doing anything for you sitting there. And so that was another mistake that black made here. He's not only does white control the center, but white has developed so many more pieces than black. And so now if black wants to try and get in this game, black has to waste like 3 moves trying to figure out like safe spaces for his pieces to even get out, because they're all still in. All he's moved is his pawns while white's forces have mobilized. And now we go back. The last thing you want to do, the third thing that's most important to the basics of chess, is king safety. And this is achieved by either castling or in some other way protecting your king and making sure. So there are 2 spaces on the board, or there's 1 space on the board for each side that is the weakest point for each side. And so that's the pawn diagonal from the king above the bishop on each side. So for white, it's f2, this pawn is the weakest because there's no minor pieces, referring to bishops and knights, threatening this space. And so, if white were to move his bishop, down here, or if black were to move his bishop down here, there's really nothing that white can do in that case, except move his king out. And you don't want to move your king out because then your king, let's see this, now your king is super vulnerable to something like that, and then you have to waste it. You have to waste a turn moving your king back, and then black can try to get his queen out and threaten these spaces if white continues making terrible moves. Something like, this is just for example, something like this could happen where, is it white's move? Whoops. See, now that's basically checkmate because there's nothing white can do in this case because he can't take the bishop because the queen is threatening that space, and this configuration of moves obviously wouldn't happen in real life, but it's an important thing to learn. And the same thing on black. It's f7 on black is the most vulnerable piece, and so a lot of chess openings will have somewhere in there they'll have you do something like bishop to c4. Oh, by the way, this tutorial kind of assumes that you understand algebraic notation. That's kind of this stuff, and basically that means that every space has a letter and a number associated with it. Kind of like it's basically just a coordinate system, but on the x-axis, this way it's A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, and going up it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, obviously. So, or all the way to 8. So this is F. The F, on the rows it's F, and then here it's 7. And so moving your bishop to C4 kind of pins, this pawn. It's attacking that vulnerable F7 space. And so a lot of openings will have that, built in because, and that also is why the light squared bishop it's one of the reasons why the light squared bishop, aka the bishop on the white spaces for white, and the dark squared bishop for black, the bishop on the dark spaces, are more powerful, is because they are the ones that are going to have access to the vulnerable squares, because the vulnerable square for white is a dark square and the vulnerable square for black is a light square. But anyway, kingside safety, you want to protect that space, and you want to make sure that your king is protected in all other aspects as well. And the way that you normally do that is castling. So normally you'll see a lot of openings will either will have built-in opening sequences that allow you to either castle kingside or queenside. And just for a refresher course on what castling actually is, I'm going to show you a kingside castle. A kingside castle where the king always moves 2 spaces over and then the rook moves on the other side of the king. So that is a kingside castle where, and it's called a kingside castle because the king is moving towards his own side. The board is kind of split down this line of kingside and queenside. And so castling kingside, kind of takes, it doesn't completely eliminate that weakness, but it kind of takes care of it because now, if he wants to move his bishop in, you're still in check, but the rook can come in and, take it out. So it doesn't matter as much. And then a queenside castle is a little bit, most of the time you'll see kingside castles because for a castle you have to, clear these 2 spaces or these 3 spaces. So a lot of times you'll see kingside castles because you have to move 3 as opposed to 2 spaces, and you also don't normally want to get your queen out as fast as you want to get your bishops and knights out, your minor pieces. You kind of want to have those on the board pretty fast, but your queen can kind of hang back a little bit because your queen is very good at protecting your king, and so a lot of times you don't really need to do queenside castles, or if you do want to do a queenside castle, what you'll normally see is, again, these are just fake moves so that I can demonstrate queenside castling. normally what you'll see is something like on white, you'll see queen to e2. And so that's only one move, and it still keeps the queen in the vicinity of the king and still kind of develops the piece, but it doesn't, completely leave the king's side. And then now once you've done that, you can castle queen side where the king always moves 2 over, and then the bishop moves 3. Show that on black as well. And this also isn't as popular because it doesn't help you with that vulnerable space here. So now that we've gone over that, let's go over one of the more popular openings in chess. This one was discovered, I want to say, all the way back in like 1490 because people have been playing chess for a long, long, long time. And this is called the Queen's Gambit. And it's called the Queen's Gambit. Well, a gambit refers to any time where you're going to try and lose a piece to strategically, you're losing a piece, but you're trying to gain something in terms of position or strategy, or it's a trap and taking that piece with the piece that you want your opponent to take the piece with, puts him at a disadvantage later, and that's kind of advanced, but the Queen's Gambit isn't really a gambit because you normally end up taking back that piece, the piece that you are gambling with, and if your opponent tries to hold on to that piece, it can end up being very bad for them if they're not a very good player. So the Queen's Gambit goes like this. You start out on white. If you want to execute, I guess, the Queen's Gambit, you have to be on white. You move your pawn up 2. That is pawn to d4. Then your opponent goes pawn to d5. And this is a pretty, popular start, moving the pawns up in this way because, let's just examine this move for a second. If you don't want to bring your knight out immediately, the first thing that you have to move is a pawn. And if you want to control the center and you want to develop your pieces, there are a few better ways to do it than moving up either this pawn or this pawn, because these allow you to get your bishops out. And the bishops are normally, one of the first things that you'd want to bring out, along with your knights. So plus putting a pawn in the center allows you to kind of control that space and threaten it a little bit. And so a lot of times what the reason that this move is made is to kind of counter the move to control the center. And so now you guys are kind of, both players are stuck in this scenario because obviously the pawns can't move to the other side of each other. And so, in terms of moves, that's one of black's best moves to counter the aggression and the center controlling nature of pawn to d4. So anyway, after that, it's also why it's called the Queen's Gambit. It starts with that. Then after that, what white does is this, and you move your queenside bishop pawn up 2, and now this pawn is attacking the black pawn, and so this is how the Queen's Gambit starts, is this sequence of 3 moves, d4, d5, c4, and then from this you either accept the Queen's Gambit, which means black takes the pawn, or declines the Queen's Gambit, or denies the Queen's Gambit. I kind of like to think of it as denies, and does something different. And so we're gonna go into accepted first, because this can end up pretty good for white if you're playing with an inexperienced player, because if black tries to hold on to the piece that they take, they could be in a world of hurt. So let's go over that. So let's say black decides to accept the Queen's Gambit, takes the pawn. Now, in terms of center control, neither of you really have a huge advantage, but black has just taken one of your pawns, and so black is up in this case. It's not a huge deal, and so if you're trying to punish the other player, what you're going to want to try and do is threaten to take that back, and what you want to do there is you move your pawn up to e3, and this a lot of people ask, why not move it up to e4? And in truth, there's really no point to moving it up to e4 as opposed to e3, because e3 allows you to do the same thing, which is the purpose of the move, is getting this bishop and having it threaten this pawn, so that you can threaten to take back the pawn that they took from you. Yeah, so it accomplishes the same goal, and it defends this pawn from, if your opponent decides to move that one or that one, you have a defense mechanism in place, and so that's why it's pretty good. Then let's say your opponent wants to keep the black pawn and says, no, like, I'm not going to let you take this. I'm going to move this pawn up to defend. Not necessarily a bad idea, just not really the ideal move. And so now you're obviously not going to want to take it with your bishop, because if you do that, then white's going to take it, and then now white's up not only a pawn, but a pawn and a minor piece, which you obviously don't want. So back that up for a second. Now what you're going to want to do is move your a pawn up 2 spaces, and now I guess the immediate thought here is, well, why don't I just take it? Why would I do anything different than just taking this pawn? And the reason is because if you take it, if black takes the pawn, then either white takes with the rook, and now white's rook is out, and you have 0 pieces developed here besides for pawns, and so you're in a pretty poor spot, and now you're tied in terms of pawns. Or plus, pretty much no matter what you do, this pawn is going to go next, unless you want to move a bishop all the way out to defend it, unless you want to really commit to defending this pawn, or which is even worse for you really, you take with the queen, and then you're threatening check, and then you have to move it there, and then you can take this pretty easily. So just overall a bad move. So what players who can see that and anticipate that will do is they'll move their pawn up like this, and then so now it's like 3 layers of defense. So if you want to go through that, you got to go through this and this first. But now what they probably don't see is the fact that this pawn is the only thing keeping, like if I move my queen here, this pawn is the only thing keeping me from taking or threatening to take this rook. So what you do is you take this pawn here, and then logically he moved in to defend it, so he's going to defend it, and now he's still up 1 pawn, and now he's still defending this pawn, so he's thinking, yeah, like, you still can't take me with the bishop because I'll take you, perfect. But what your opponent has not realized is now he's in a lot of trouble, because now move like 4 or 5, 6 actually, move 6, and you're threatening his rook. And so there are a couple ways that white could go, or black could go about defending this. The worst one by far is moving the queen, because then you just take it and literally nothing has changed. You're still threatening the rook, so most players will not do that. The other move is moving the bishop in, but again, if you take it, pretty much nothing has changed. This time you can, like, you're still threatening the rook. This time the only real like move you have is to move the knight out this way, so that if I were to take it, I could get taken, and it's not worth losing a queen that early in the game for a rook and a bishop. So what you actually want to do is just move your bishop there, or sorry, move your knight there, and then you still, the thing is, black still ends up losing a small piece of material, and now once you move your bishop in, Oh, sorry. Now you have to move your bishop there. Well, I guess you could also move your queen there, but then you still take. Um, you have to move your bishop there to prevent check, and like you get checked super early. So now, the threat to your rook is pretty much abated because, you're not going to lose your queen super early, but white can super easily retreat. You just move it there and then move it back, or, really anywhere, you can move it anywhere. Um, and so that's why, if your opponent is a little bit inexperienced, you can kind of get the jump on them by just making sure that they, do that series of pretty dumb pawn movements. So yeah, just your A pawn here. He'll defend with this if he's good. If he's not, he loses even more. And then take, move the queen up, and he's done. All right. So that normally though is not how the Queen's Gambit goes because most players are a little bit better than that. There we go. So there's the Queen's Gambit accepted. And from this point, um, if you want to immediately threaten with this, most players will accept, that that they're not going to keep this and they've already gotten something with it, so it doesn't mean as much to them. So, normally black players will start at this point, will start, just developing their pieces, moving a rook in or moving their bishop uh, to a threatening position, just overall developing because they don't want to get too far behind because now once you have this, um, that is still pretty advantageous to the white player because the white player has two pawns in the center as well as a bishop developed, and the black player only has a knight in there. However, this is not the main way that the Queen's Gambit accepted is played. In highly competitive chess, chess openings and then, up to like 10 moves after have been pretty well studied and thought out. And they have their variations, but the main, sequence of moves that arises from a particular opening is called a line. And so the main line for most at highest levels of play for the Queen's Gambit accepted, actually White's move in this case for 3 is going to be moving um, the knight to f3. This allows you to quickly develop a knight pretty immediately, like third turn. You have that piece out before your opponent has anything out here, and it allows you to um, it doesn't come at the cost of eventually taking that pawn because then black will normally counter with that same move, just getting the pieces out, and then you can still come here and make that move. So that's normally how that goes is you'll develop the knight and then he'll develop the knight and then you move up one, defend this pawn on d4 right here. And then the next move for black is normally e6, just moving the pawn up basically in the same fashion you are, hoping to, eventually be able to develop this bishop right here. So then you take with the white bishop. That's normally the fifth move is the bishop takes bx4, the bishop takes the pawn on c4. And then, it can go one of a couple ways from here. I mean, all openings can kind of, they have many different ways that they could develop. A lot of times what you'll see is this move, you'll see something like that, c5, and this accomplishes a couple things. It sets up a little offense here, but it's kind of a standoff because white can't take black because Um, then black takes the bishop, and now black has, I mean, now you're literally identical in terms of positions of pawns and boards, and that's, not really fun. Plus, white up until this point has kind of had a tempo plus a center controlling advantage. You know, certainly here, white has more pieces in the center, more pawns in the center, is threatening more area just with that bishop, and so going c5 into that into taking it into that literally completely evens up the board, and that's advantageous for black, as black has been kind of at a tempo disadvantage this whole time, but not for white. So white doesn't really want to take, and black doesn't want to take because let's say white does something dumb like that. Black doesn't want to take because then he gets taken, and now there's a huge disadvantage in, well, not huge, but there's a pretty big disadvantage in terms of control of center, because this pawn is not threatening nearly as many spaces or controlling nearly as many important spaces as this pawn is in the center here on the queen's lane. Plus now you have a pawn here where the queen really can't take it because then he gets taken for nothing. She gets taken for nothing, and you still have this bishop here as white, and so it's threatening a lot more spaces, so it's not really advantageous for black to do that either. So now after c5, what white will normally do is, because he doesn't really want to do this, and there isn't a hugely advantageous and like very good move in terms of developing pieces for this point. White's going to focus on king safety, and castle is normally the thing that white will do. That gives white a pretty big advantage in terms of king safety over black, who has not castled. Although black is defending its weak spot well, not nearly as well as white. And so what a very good black player will do is a6, and this can kind of seem like, the first time I saw this I was like, well, why would black do that? And it's not really so much that in and of itself that's a good move, but it sets up for b5. It sets up for this pawn coming to this space, and it sets up for this pawn coming down to b5 and threatening this bishop, but the bishop can't just, let's say you do something stupid again, the bishop can't, b5 comes down, bishop can't really take because then he'll get taken. So what a lot of white players will do in that scenario, on white's end, normally the move is, you still want to keep this bishop here because even though this pawn is here, if it moves, boom, you're directly threatening f7 again. So white players will normally do something like, whose turn is it? White players will normally do something like, hold on. White players will normally do something like this, where they'll back the bishop up, but they don't give up the place that it was threatening. And there's the other option of moving it back, but you never really want to move a bishop back from where, like, if you develop a piece, it's very important that you don't really want to move it again. I'll go into that after we go into the second version of Queen's Gambit. But it just makes sense, from this standpoint, he can't really be threatened by any pawns, like, except for this one, but then boom. And so it's a pretty safe move for white in this case to go. Then, then, a lot of times from here, the possibilities are pretty open. This is, this is just the standard line of the first 7 moves of the Queen's Gambit accepted. And so as you can see from this little configuration here, white is in a slightly advantageous position to black at this point, although, equality is definitely achievable. There are definitely some moves that black can make here to even up the game. But at this point, in terms of tempo and in terms of piece development, this bishop can't go very far. This bishop can't go very far. The only thing that black has developed at all really are his pawns, which are kind of in an unusual pawn structure, which is not very good, and this knight that hasn't really done anything. Whereas, white has a couple of pawns in the center, and he's got, this bearing down on the f7 space, and he's got the same knight that black does in basically the same spot, and he also has his king castled, so he has a ton of king safety in this opening, and so this isn't as popular anymore because it kind of favors white, at least at this stage. There's also a pretty popular move where you go, this is black, and then you go that. There's a pretty popular variation which can end in the same configuration as before, where you go a6 immediately, but it doesn't really end up being much different because once white moves there, you can just kind of mimic the same structure that you just saw. You can go like that, and then white takes, goes there. It just ends up being pretty much the same game in terms of and it ends up being pretty much the same idea. As white goes there, now you can castle, and then this, and then you move back, and it's the exact same configuration, just achieved in a different sequence of moves. So what we normally talk about, or what in recent years most at the highest level, like more people have been playing, is the Queen's Gambit declined line, and this is where you don't take the Queen's Gambit, you completely decline it, and this ends up in definitely a different configuration. So let's play this through. So now here's the Queen's Gambit. Do you want this pawn or not? And some people say no, and so they'll go for this move, e6, which is in the original Queen's Gambit accepted line, but much later after the Gambit's actually taken. And so basically this is saying, no, I'm not going to take that piece from you. And normally black does not end up actually taking that piece because, if he takes it later, it's like a pretty big strategic disadvantage to open up this, move this up. It's a pretty big advantage to open up, this nice queen's lane for white, and it's just like a generally bad move with bad win rates. And so what white will do here is not take, because then if you do, then you just end up basically in the same spot, and that's again parity for black and white. It's equality, and that's not what white wants. White wants, since white goes first, white wants to establish dominance or have some positional advantage, especially because with this move, you shut your light square bishop in, and two of the things that your big ideas in the opening are, you want to develop your pieces and you want to control the center. And you can't develop your pieces, nor can you control the center if your pieces are being held in by your pawns, because now this bishop has to go here, like he has to go there, and then he has to go there, or here, or whatever. He has to, make more than one move, whereas if it were to be something like this, and then whereas if you didn't make this move, you could kind of get the bishop out right away. So, say the move. Now what? Now the third move for white is normally the same. Just, get that horse out there. And black will normally respond in kind. And now a lot of times what white will do in this case is just immediately move that bishop to threaten because, well, one, if eventually black does end up taking that pawn, white is going to want to, move this pawn out to get this bishop out. And if you move the pawn out before you get this bishop out past it, then, you're shutting in your bishop, the same as we just talked about was bad for black to do. So you don't want to do that. So then, getting this bishop out allows you to move the pawns on this side, blocking in as many colored spaces as you need. Now, what normally will happen is actually not this, because, there's no real point to white going here in this case if there's nothing to take there. So what happens is black will do something like this. And this just kind of is some added protection because something we haven't discussed yet, and something this is a good segue into, is the idea of pinning. And in this case, let's move. Yeah, a good example of it is right here. And so let's say you make this move. And this move is made. Right now, if black were to move the knight, then white basically just gets a free queen. I mean, it's not free; it's for a bishop, but that is totally worth it, especially on move. I don't even know what move that is. That would be move. Yeah, that would be move 5. And you definitely don't want to lose your queen for bishop move 5. I don't really think I have to explain why. Your queen is hugely powerful, and you will probably need her later on. Plus, being down a queen is a positional advantage that is huge. Being down a bishop is not as big a deal. You can just kind of, play to the spaces that if you're down a bishop, just play around it, play around the diagonals. But if you're down a queen, you kind of have to play like you're down a bishop and a rook all in the same space. And that's huge because the queen has such a huge positional advantage and can threaten so many different places at once, especially if you get her into the center. You just don't want to lose a queen. And so, if black moves his horse at all, you get the free queen. And so basically the horse is pinned to this spot because if he moves, something catastrophic happens. We'll go over another bigger example of pinning. Normally pinning is done with a king because the only thing more valuable than a queen in this game is the king, because if you're pinned and if you move, then you're in check. You literally cannot move legally in the game. All right, so anyway, that's why that ends that little pin, because now if let's say, let's say if I want to move this bishop, if I want to move this knight, then I still have a free shot at the bishop, but it's a bishop for bishop trade. And now the queen is moved out a little bit. The queen is at least a little bit developed. The pawn structure is, roughly equal, a little bit favoring black, but you've just bishop traded, and black is definitely controlling the center a little bit better than white in this case. So it's just a bad move all around for white to do that, and so that's why that's moved in there. And then a lot of times what you'll see is the last move of this little opening sequence is c3, knight to c3, because this gives you a little bit added threat on the center space right here. And so now you both have some resources pointing to this center pawn, and then this is one of the first videos I ever watched on this. The guy described it as now is where the fireworks really go off, and I think you can kind of see why that's true, because you've got a lot of threat on this particular pawn, and that's kind of, we'll go into a little bit of mid-game strategy. That's the Queen's Gambit. Go into a little bit of mid-game strategy. So pawn structure is a pretty big deal. Let's just some random example. I'm just gonna click randomly. For a second here. Hold on. Yeah. So yeah, this would never happen. I don't think anyone would so readily trade their queens like that. So dumb, leave. But it brings to mind the question of pawn structure and its importance. And I think the term is self-explanatory, but what you want to look for isn't. Pawn structure is just kind of the layout of your pawns on the board, because there's a lot of them and they attack in a pretty unique way, and so it's actually pawn structure can be pretty valuable, especially because at the beginning of the game, at the beginning of the game, there's they're covering all of these more major pieces, and if you don't move them, they stay covering these major pieces. But if you do move them, if you have something like this is that example, these major pieces aren't really protected as they were anymore. But also, you want your pawns to protect each other. You want, this pawn structure is super annoying to, try and break up, because if white wants to try and break it up, can't do that because you're going to get taken. And white can't go here because he's gonna. I mean, he puts him in check, but he's gonna get taken by this pawn. And so having having a pawn structure where the pawns kind of watch out for each other is nice, because you still can't even take out. Let's say, all right, let's have white do something, or this will never happen. But just for the purposes of example, if you want to, break up this pawn structure, you kind of have to do it from behind, which is super annoying because even to get here, I had to grossly break the rules of any sane chess player. And if I want to take this, I'm still, assuming I somehow got here without definitely being taken beforehand, I take this pawn structure out, but I lose this rook because at the base of the pawn structure is, minor pieces in the king who are threatening. So, this pawn structure is pretty much protected all the way through. And if you want to, get a crack at it, you have to be willing to sacrifice some of your pawns. So you want to have a pawn structure that, both defends the piece in the back here, but more importantly, will defend the pawns itself. This definitely at the highest level does not work, but if you're playing at an amateur level, which I do and especially was for a long time growing up, one of my favorite things to do is I'm just gonna move this back and forth here to show you kind of what I'm talking about, just so. This pawn structure is kind of nonsensical at the highest level, and no one's just going to move their horse back and forth and let you do it. But this is super annoying, and many people have gotten very frustrated. I've seen them playing against this strategy because it's a quite annoying pawn structure where, you know, in the back, almost every one of them, if not every single one of these pieces, these back pieces, is protected by a major piece. This is, I think, the only exception to that rule. Yes, this is not protected by any major pieces because it's right near f7. But this one is protected by the bishop here. If someone were to take this, I can just take it with the bishop. Someone tries to take this, I can take it with my rook, or sorry, with my knight. And if someone tries to take this, obviously the rook's there, and you can also do it the other way. Just hold on a second. This is kind of annoying to get to, but no. So now, so now this is even better because they're all protected. All of the base, all of the outer pawn or inner pawns are protected this way because this one's protected by the bishop and the rook, and these three are all protected by the queen. Um, this one's also protected by the bishop, but you can see why, if he wants to break into that, he's going to lose some pieces pretty quickly trying to break in. So if you aren't really a competitive player and you want to annoy someone, try it. Anyway, pinning. Let's do a king pin just for the sake of demonstration. So now that is a pretty easy way to pin the king, or to pin against the king, I guess you would say. Because now this bishop is pointing, bearing down on this pawn, and this pawn obviously cannot move because if he moves, the king is, in check, and you can't do that. A better example I would say would be normally, pinning a pawn isn't that big of a deal. Let's say like something like that. Um, Now the knight is pinned here, and obviously there are ways to get around this via moving just a pawn or something. But like for now, the knight is pinned against the king because the knight can't move. Otherwise, the king is a goner, and you can't do it with if you were trying to pin with a bishop, it doesn't really work. You can't pin a bishop with a bishop because they'll just take each other. You can't pin a rook with a rook or anything. And another thing that I like is, let me see if I can even demonstrate this, is forking, and most often with a knight. And let's see how I go about. Okay. And what that is you will make a player decide between two pieces. Normally this is done with a knight, but you can do it with a pawn too. I guess theoretically any two pieces. My favorite one is, let's see, get the knight out there, move that. No, there, and then move the knight back. I'm just trying to get it into the correct positioning. Obviously, this demonstration wouldn't ever happen, but let's say you want to get your so let's say like this happened somehow, and what you want to do now is you want to get your here we go. There we go. Okay, so forking in this way is now the knight is threatening both the queen and the king. And this is the best kind of fork because now, obviously you have to choose which one to move and which one to save. And in this case, obviously you would just come in here and, eliminate that fork. But let's, for argument's sake, say that this isn't there. What you are forced to choose between is, do I want to save this piece or do I want to save this piece? And obviously for this, you have to choose, I want to save the king. And so you move the king and then you get the other piece. And so you can also do it with something with like two other valuable pieces. The queen is particularly good at this because for the knight you kind of have to arrange in this pattern like with one space in between. But with a queen, you could be you can be in very varied positions because she can move like a rook and a bishop. So like if the queen is on this space, one person could be on this space and one person could be on this space, and she could still fork you between them because she's threatening both at once. Yeah. So I think that's all I really wanted to go over. But if you want to learn chess from someone way better at teaching chess than me and way better at chess than me, you should definitely head over to Learnivore because they have actual chess tutors and not me. I feel like that's really the key there. So yeah, I'll see you guys next Friday, and thanks for watching. That was horrendous. Did I just get cut off? Was this legitimately a silent video? Was this legitimately a silent video?